katakana, and kanji. Hiragana and katakana are much more simple, whereas kanji is based on Chinese characters. They look like pictograms. Hiragana and katakana are simpler. Hiragana is the basic alphabet of Japanese, and katakana is more used for foreign words and allows for Japanese people to pronounce these foreign words without necessarily knowing English or any other language. So the number one thing is hiragana. But I would recommend learning both of them to get started, and it's actually not super hard. I think I memorized this completely in about a month or two, and just through using flashcards. I think Japanese sometimes really just requires like rote memorization, and I think there's a lot of cool apps and resources online that you can use to make this more fun for yourself. Or if you're okay with just flashcards, I highly recommend just making physical flashcards, because it makes a huge difference when you're actually touching paper and like looking at these words. And I still have like the manual ones that I made as well. So I recommend memorizing each character, understanding what the sound is, and if you can, picking up a good pronunciation of each character could actually really help you in the long term. But I wouldn't say worry too much about that. The things that kind of were difficult for me was ragyo, which is rariruredo. The R sound in Japanese is really different from English. It's kind of a mix of the L sound, D sound, and R sound. And so you kind of combine them all together. I can put out another video in the future about this, but getting that pronunciation down will take some time, and it took me like almost half a year to like fully understand how to pronounce it. So that, and then it's also kind of a mix of the L sound is also a little difficult. So I recommend starting off with that. The next way that I would go about learning Japanese, if I had to start completely over, is with vocabulary and learning just basic vocab, combining that with practice sentences. And a lot of this is also rote memorization. I would recommend having like a big notepad where you can write down all these new words that you're learning, maybe even add in a drawing next to these words, so that way it'll act as a mnemonic so that you're better able to learn these words. So I'm a very visual learner, so it really helped when I was like learning body parts, for example, to draw those body parts out, touch the part of the body that I'm talking about, and then be like, okay, that's the word that it is. So yeah, it's really important to kind of associate a word or a sentence with other memories and other senses of your body, so that way you're able to effectively just cement that into your knowledge. Before we get into the next section, I'm going to talk about the main part of this video that a lot of other YouTubers talk about as well, and I used exactly when I was learning Japanese, is immersion. And immersion doesn't mean necessarily having to be in Japan and visiting and being surrounded by that language 24/7. It doesn't have to look like that. At least in my case, I didn't go to Japan for the first 5+ years that I was learning Japanese. I was a broke middle school student. Like, I didn't have money for courses. I didn't want to tell my parents that I was learning Japanese because they wouldn't approve of it. I didn't really have the opportunity to go to Japan. And so you kind of have to be creative in situations like that. And my way of doing it was just surrounding my environment with Japanese, even if I'm not in Japan. And what that looks like is, for example, writing little notes to yourself in Japanese, listening to Japanese music, watching TV dramas, movies, just anything that you have access to that gives you an idea of what Japanese sounds like in different settings. Because the way people sing in Japanese, the way they talk in TV dramas versus like reality shows and day-to-day conversations, they're all in anime too. Like, every single one is so distinctively different and based on who's talking. Like, whether it's an elderly man or a child or an adult, they all sound completely different, especially because there are honorifics in this language. People speak differently to someone who's of greater status to them, and so they use things called keigo. Keigo is honorific language. It's different from regular Japanese that's casual and is much more polite. And so understanding when people are using what and kind of just getting your ear used to it. You don't have to know necessarily what's going on, but I personally recommend, if you're starting to learn Japanese, have 1 to 2 shows or music that you watch that you're willing to kind of slow down as you watch it. Like, stop here and there and be like, I wonder what this word means. Or, you know, when you're watching a show and the English subtitles are just enough that you catch on to like a word and understand that, oh, like, I don't know, like home. Home means book. Like, you can catch on to that. And I kind of feel like it's easier in the beginning to kind of memorize tougher words because you just don't have too much knowledge of Japanese. And so it allows you to kind of pick up words that maybe you normally wouldn't have noticed. And I'd say just double down on that. I think having a good mindset going into learning a language is so key. Having a goal, having an idea of what it is that you want to accomplish will change the game. And full context, the reason I learned Japanese was because I really love this manga called Alice in the Country of Hearts. They had a video game and it was never translated into English and I was dying to check it out. I just love the world that they created in that manga. And yeah, that's just how I started learning Japanese. And I don't talk about it too much on my channel because I think I was embarrassed in the past, but I truly love it. And I was like, hey, I mean, maybe I'll dedicate 2 to 3 years to learn Japanese. And as soon as I started and hit the ground running, I was like, I really like this. I think I'm gonna be doing it for the rest of my life, which is a bit dramatic, but I think I was just really, really obsessed with Japanese. And at the time I was debating whether I wanted to learn Korean or Japanese. And I knew that I had to commit to one if I wanted to keep going even further and get deep with the language. So I think it requires a certain level of commitment to yourself that you want to learn this language to achieve the goal that you want. So I implore you guys to just take some time and determine what that goal is and how much time you're willing to commit for it. But yeah, once you kind of have an idea of certain shows that you watch, I recommend just kind of stopping it here and there, shadowing it, kind of pronouncing the words that the characters are saying. So that way you are kind of training your mouth as well as your ears to the language. So even if you don't necessarily live in Japan or if you're not visiting, you can still kind of simulate that environment. Another way you can do that is like making friends, which at the time I also struggled with. So I couldn't really make a lot of Japanese friends in my neighborhood. There just wasn't a Japanese community at the time. And so, yeah, I made online friends, and I don't recommend making online friends until like, I don't know, like 3, 4, 5 years down the line. At least I almost didn't talk to anyone in Japanese for probably the first 5 years, which I don't recommend, but having a language partner I think would be great. It really depends on what kind of learner you are, because I do know a lot of people who pick up very natural Japanese after going to the bar with a bunch of salarymen. So if that's more your speed, I do recommend meeting people earlier on, but I've seen a lot of the time people just get focused on like hanging out with friends that sometimes language learning does fly out the door. But if you go in with really strong intentions, I think you can really make it a great learning experience for yourself. Next, I would suggest starting to pick up grammar as you learn more basic sentences and vocabulary. To this day, I will constantly recommend Take Him's Guide to Learning Japanese. Even though I have my own Japanese course, I will still 100% say that if you want a really comprehensive theory-based grammar resource, it's free, it's available, it has everything that you'd possibly want. So I highly recommend checking that out. And yeah, grammar can be probably one of the hardest parts of Japanese, at least for me. I feel like most things came pretty easy except for grammar. The difference between ha and ga to this day, I have not seen resources explain it as well as this guide. And even then, I still feel like it's not enough because the way that I see it used day to day in Japan is still pretty confusing. But the closer you get, the better. And it's tough to aim for perfectionism when learning a language. And I think accepting that and kind of going with the flow, but with at least for me, like I was like, I want to know every single thing about Japan. Like I want to know every little thing. And it's kind of like a aim for the moon, aim for the stars, land on the moon kind of situation where you won't necessarily get everything, but you'll still get extremely close. And so, yeah, I highly recommend checking out that resource. I also talk about grammar on my course as well. So if you don't necessarily want like a super comprehensive version, but enough to know generally what it is and not focus too much, but focus on speaking, I think my course is definitely a recommendation as well. And in my course, I go over specific situations and how to have a conversation in those situations with the correct grammar you can use, pronunciation, and how you can effectively communicate with people using the things that I teach you in the course. If you haven't already, definitely check out my Japanese beginner course, Japanese with Ananya. I talk about a lot of these topics and it's more practical. So if you are preparing for a trip to Japan or want to talk to locals, etc., this course really just combines all the things that I've seen to date and boils it down so that it's super easy to understand and you will be speaking Japanese in no time. The link's down below, so definitely check it out. I also go through grammar as well as vocab and conversational sentences and ways that you can speak to locals in Japan, and I highly recommend it if you are looking to have a more casual way to learn Japanese, but that is actually still super useful. And there are conversation corners where there are specific situations like ordering at a restaurant, talking to someone, talking about your hobbies, introducing yourself, and how to confidently speak Japanese in these situations with a strong pronunciation and vocabulary. One of the biggest things I do highlight in my course is pronunciation. For me, pronunciation and having a good accent is what I focused on the most when I learned Japanese, because Japan, like, let's face it, is a very homogenous country to this day. Straight off the bat, I felt like I needed to have a super good pronunciation and sound and seem very Japanese if I wanted other people to listen to me and feel comfortable. So I did not want any sort of accent. I didn't want to trip up on my words. And so if you want to have a really natural sounding pronunciation / accent, I highly recommend looking at media and doing shadowing and talking to real Japanese speakers, because this is how you build natural sounding Japanese. And I have a lot of friends who do speak very good natural sounding Japanese, and it doesn't matter if you don't have a strong vocabulary, but if you sound like the real deal, people will open up to you so much more. And that was my goal. I didn't want to have extremely good vocabulary. I wanted to sound like a gyaru or like a Japanese high school kid. Like I wanted to sound like them. And I was able to do that by taking in that media, seeing what they were watching, and trying to copy it to the best of my ability. Japanese pronunciation, I think, really starts when you start learning hiragana. So if you're getting started, make sure you are checking your pronunciation, making sure you're getting these things right, and it'll build a great foundation to when you're actually going through with learning new words, etc. But yeah, that's definitely something I highly recommend focusing on. Whew, okay, we went through a lot, but I will say that if your goal is to get the JLPT N1 or any of the others, it's definitely a different approach. I think you should be either taking classes or reading a lot of books on Japanese learning, which I think overall you should do. I personally didn't use a lot of textbooks, but I do recommend it there are some really good ones. So using textbooks as well as immersing yourself in the language through everything that you do. For example, once you kind of hit a certain point with your Japanese, thinking in Japanese is so important. And I was thinking in Japanese. You kind of can start by simple little things, like little words that you'll say in Japanese in your head rather than English. Overall, I think flashcards are your best friend. I see a lot of creators mention like Anki. I've always recommended Anki for a long time. And any sort of flashcard apps are super useful to remember vocabulary, and kind of with vocab, you just gotta memorize. I do think that making mnemonics with kanji and vocab is so helpful, and I recommend that as well. But if your goal is to pass the JLPT, I don't think this advice is necessarily the best. If you want to speak Japanese super fluently, this is the video, but for JLPT, I think it's a lot more just like heads down studying textbooks, just studying the content that's on that test, because I don't think necessarily everything in that test is stuff that you see day to day in conversational situations. The N1 for sure was not like Japanese that I was using day to day, but it's kind of stuff that you see in the news and read about, etc. Yeah, at the end of the day, I will say learning Japanese can be so fun. There was genuinely no day where I was like, oh my god, I hate learning Japanese, or oh my god, this is so much work. I think if you can re-engineer this process to make it truly fun for yourself, there's no way that you'll end up feeling like, ugh, I hate this, or ugh, I don't want to do this anymore. You will hit plateaus, and that's part of the learning process, but understanding different ways of studying and kind of changing the process for yourself is kind of how you can break through those plateaus and keep studying as well. I know that was a lot, but if you're just starting to learn Japanese or you've been doing it for a while, I highly recommend implementing any of these learning tips. If you guys want to see more videos about this, do let me know. I definitely am still learning Japanese to this day. I don't really study too much Japanese day to day anymore, but I do love this language, and I hope this video was helpful to you. And if you guys have any questions, let me know down in the comments. And if you have any Japanese learning tips, let everyone know in the comments. I'll definitely be reading them as well. But yeah, if you guys sticked around till the end of this video, I appreciate you so much. I'm really excited to share more with you guys on Japanese, my life here, etc. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Ja ne!